Good afternoon, RecLink family. My name is Ran Harris, and this is a version of the RecLink Speaker Series. Today, my co-hosts are Jack Simcoe and Laura O'Neill, fellow coordinators in Melbourne Southeast. And today, we're joined by Kate Thomas. Kate's a former WNBL player and coach with Kokoro Consulting. And also, we're joined by Kellie Dunn, who's the National Learning and Development Manager for Lifeline, in addition to being Manager of Family Violence and Child Wellbeing at CAFS. Ladies and Jack, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Ron. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great for joining us. Thought I might just kick it off by asking Kate and Kellie how you guys know each other.
Yeah, so I met Kellie. I was lucky enough to work with Kellie in her previous role of the National Training Manager at Lifeline. Yeah, Kellie invited myself and one of my colleagues in to the DV Alert training seminar that they were running to do some stuff around self-care and wellbeing, actually. So yeah, very lucky to have been part of that and have met Kellie that way. And we connected straight away and bonded over our love of sport. So Kellie's got a significant background in sport as well. And, you know, we're both really passionate, hence why we love you guys so much, about the power of sport, you know, for healing and helping communities thrive. So yeah, that's kind of how we met and how we bonded, and now Kellie and I are doing some work together in that space through Kokoro Sport, which is part of our organisation.
Well, that sounds like a great lead-in, Kellie, to the work that you're doing with Lifeline. I mean, I'm going to state the obvious here and say that it's been a really crazy year. How have you seen the year impacting on the Lifeline service and your clients that you work with?
Yeah, I have to be honest, Ron, that was one of my previous roles. So before this one, and I'm still very much an advocate for Lifeline and the support services that it provides, and was a volunteer for nearly 20 years on the phones, as well as being their national manager and delivering and running a local Lifeline service. And so certainly Lifeline plays a pivotal part in helping Australians all across the country, in all different communities, look at ways of dealing with their mental health crisis and really looking for points of connection. So my current role that I have now is in family violence specifically. So I moved from a national role into coming back locally into the Central Highlands or Ballarat area. I really wanted to use some of what I'd learnt nationally and bring that back into a state which is dubbed the land of milk and honey when it comes to family violence funding, which is such a weird way to describe such a terrible, community problem that we have, is family violence. But yeah, so it's been really wonderful bringing some of the work that I've done with Lifeline back into a local space with child and family services.
And so you're obviously still connected to that service and you're in that field. What has the experience been for workers in the field this year?
Oh, Ron, listen, it's just been, I think, like everybody, we none of us know, and even still now, 6 months in, we still really don't know how to navigate ourselves in our work and family lives during a pandemic where we can be performing and being at our optimal. So we know that particularly for family violence and mental health crises across our country, that it's like, even 2 weeks ago, we had another 60% increase in family violence reporting. And that happened at the start of the school holidays in Victoria. Normally school holidays are quiet. And so the spikes that we're experiencing, I think, across all areas, so alcohol and other drugs, problem gambling, you know, all the areas, people are looking for other ways to deal with, you know, the unknown, with ways that are sometimes not so healthy for them and others around them.
And I mean, you know, I can speak for Jack and Laura, you know, the work that we do is in-person work, and, you know, the cruel blow of what we've been going through is that we can't actually get out there in person and connect with people, which is really what it's all about. You know, it's non-prescriptive. It takes it away from the professionals in a good way. But we aren't able to enact that. I mean, I'm wondering, Kate, how you've manage through this situation, given that, you know, coaching's all about being there, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we're kind of working in the space of building capacity of coaches around trauma-informed practice and mental health and so forth. So, a lot of our stuff's moved to online. But just to, I guess, reiterate what Kellie's saying about the workforce is that, you know, we're finding that a lot of coaches, community coaches, people that, you know, are involved with community sport in one way or another, you know, they're struggling as well, and they're not sure how to actually connect with young people, and they're hearing things, you know, from young people and people that are involved in their programs that might be quite triggering for them as well.
Yep.
So it's really difficult to, you know, find a space to kind of, you know, hold that for a lot of people. And, you know, part of our work is actually helping coaches with that, understanding a little bit more around what's happening for people in that space, and, you know, putting into place some strategies around how they can respond in these situations. But it's a really tricky time, and unfortunately I think, you know, we're going to see the vulnerable become more vulnerable in this time, and those that might just be on the edge are also kind of moving towards more of that vulnerable continuum rather than, you know, the resilience side of things. Yeah, so it is tricky, but there are things, you know, there is hope. There are things that, you know, we can all be doing to kind of, you know, move more towards resilience and support those vulnerable people and vulnerable families.
Well, I guess necessity is the mother of invention, and that applies to individuals and organisations, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And look, I was thinking, you know, I'm unashamedly first and foremost a RecLink participant, but I guess the boundary, or, you know, I guess the boundary or the line between participant and worker is, you know, more and more sort of shady, you know, as we go through, because the well-being of the people that work in the field is just as important as the people we work with.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you know, the wellbeing, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there, because if you're not doing okay, then how are you actually holding space for, you know, the people that you're working with? And, you know, I know RecLink, the incredible work you guys do within the community using sport as a vehicle, and other ways as well, but, you know, particularly sport as a vehicle to connect people, which is, you know, so healing in itself. You know, people don't need to go to an hour of therapy every week to get benefits that they do from just connecting and building up some of those protective factors that sport bring. But yeah, not being able to participate in community sport at the moment, yeah, is a pretty tricky thing.
Yeah, because that's really our sort of safeguard, is that we're involved in that field, and we can participate in our own way. So I was just wondering, Kellie, if you might have some sort of general advice or guidelines that you use when you're working with people who work in the field, as a way of keeping them sort of at the top of their game.
Yeah, absolutely we do, Ran. And I'm just wondering, Kate, whether it might be appropriate now to start to share it. We've got a bit of a slide deck, Ran, to sort of talk through some of, for me, the starting point is when we're talking about mental health, what actually is mental health? A lot of people think that mental health is mental illness and that it's bad, but it's actually not. We all have, I always say, if you've got a heart that beats and a brain that thinks, you have mental health. And our mental health is our own responsibility. So I might kick us off, if that's okay, Kate, and start with an acknowledgement to country with one of the most beautiful pictures I think I've ever seen of a footprint from a young Indigenous girl. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet in the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We also acknowledge the strength and courage of Indigenous peoples and vulnerable children and families in our community. And we thank them for sharing their stories and their lived experiences to help shape our future understanding. Okay, so Kate, if we can kick into the next slide. So one of the things that Kate and I absolutely, just seriously, our conversations that we have with each other on the weekends in between, you know, being mums and working mums and everything else, we always try and find some time together on a weekend where we touch base, and we're constantly drawn towards talking about mental fitness. So there's the concept of mental health, there's mental illness, and then there's the concept that I certainly didn't coin at this, but I use it a lot when I do sports psychology sessions with local NBL 1 teams and rowing clubs. And now we have an academy for emerging young athletes here in the Central Highlands of Westvic Academy, over about 30 different codes. And one of the greatest themes that I find most athletes and coaches want to talk about is mental fitness. So how do we stay on top of our game mentally, just like physical fitness? Okay, if you want to kick into the next one, and we'll break down a little bit, Ran, which will help us, work out, I think, lead into your question around how do we help the workforce and each other really stay mentally fit. So the World Health Organization actually defines mental health as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Now, when I think of RecLink, I think that's exactly what RecLink's doing. It's helping people bring about their abilities, their skills, to be able to help others, live productive, fruitful lives, and really contributing. So one of the greatest words I want to highlight there is the word contribution. So without connection, we actually really find ourselves in states of mental health distress. Connection is key for most situations and most people in life. There are some situations where naturally people don't need to connect, or that they come from other communities that teach other cultures around that. But ultimately, connection is absolutely what we strive for as human beings. So when we talk about mental health, it's a state of well-being. And so that's something I really want for everyone who's going to be on this webinar to actually take home, is that everyone has mental health and we are responsible for our own mental health. We're actually not responsible for other people's. We can contribute to other people's mental health, be it good or bad. And sometimes we are deliberate about that as human beings. But I cannot emphasize enough that our mental health well-being is our own responsibility. Okay, Kate, so the next slide as we kick in and then have a little bit of a look at something that I love. It's a Canadian website and organisation called The Working Mind. They have this thing called a mental health continuum. And I think this is a really great way to talk about, okay, so what does it mean if we have mental health? So it means that really any given point in time, we are as human beings on any part of this journey. So for some of our community, we're in crisis. And for the work that Kate and I do, outside of our Kokoro sport and trauma-informed sport work, is, we do deal with families and people that are in crisis. And as a service system, we help them navigate through that. Our aim is to help everybody get down to the green end, being the excellent mental health. So we have excellent state of being, excellent connection, and excellent resiliency, I guess, in that. And Kate will talk a little bit later about some of the other aspects of the brain and how it works. And Dr. Bruce Perry, who we both love dearly, who guides a lot of the work that we do, he mentioned that resiliency is a privilege. And I think that that's a really great statement. So not everybody has equal opportunity to creating resiliency. And that's why sport is such a wonderful platform, because sport is one of the most truest forms of reality, TV. It's the truest form. We never know what's going to happen. So we're constantly having to shift and change and adjust and build our mental and our physical muscle to be able to be strong. So when we're talking in the mental health continuum, part of that red end down there talks to things like, having mental illness, sorry, Kate, mental illness and signs and symptoms that tell us that things aren't okay. Some people can be very anxious, have very low moods, absenteeism at work, exhausted, for RecLink or for sports coaches, absenteeism in your programs. So people aren't coming, maybe they were and now they're not. So just some things there. Then when we start to look at what is a mental illness, so that's poor mental health, but a mental illness is where it tips into a diagnosable state of emotional state and behaviours that tell us that unless there's some intervention, and it could be medical, it could be cognitive, it could be a range of different therapies, that it will continue to get worse. So our aim is to help coaches and people, and for me at RecLink, I think you guys are community coaches. That's how I see you. And I see that our role all together is so that we can help people get from just surviving, struggling, surviving, into that thriving and hopefully excellent, and using sport as that medium. So Kate's going to now bring up another slide which helps us talk a little bit more about mental fitness. So we've talked about mental health, what it is, poor mental health, where that can look like on the continuum, and then of course mental illness when it tips over into something that we absolutely need intervention. And let me just state that for our common mood disorders like depression and anxiety, those feelings of and the behaviours and symptoms as part of feeling anxious and feeling depressed, and for some people both, clinically they say that if you're experiencing that every day for 2 weeks, that's at the point where you need intervention. 2 weeks isn't long. So, you know, we really need to hopefully hone that into people, that if you're noticing that in other people or in yourself, that the ability to bounce back isn't there, that's when you may need to reach out and speak to somebody. So to build our mental fitness up, just like our physical muscles, we need to do things so that we can build up our mental muscles. So resiliency is something that we find that people who have good mental fitness, so if we look at athletes or if we're looking at coaches who are really in the moment and focused on the game at hand or the training or any preparation prior or after their chosen sport, they show a lot of resiliency. So this is the ability to recover from or easily adjust to misfortune or change. And what I love here is down the bottom, it says psychological research has shown resiliency is very closely linked to optimism. So it is about having hope for the future. So anything that we can do that builds up hope. So as an athlete who might have an injury, or if we look at RecLink's environment, as an athlete who might relapse and go back into, abuse of alcohol and other drugs, it is the hope about moving away from that again, which is actually more important than having, I guess, interventions in that one moment. Having hope for change is actually key in this. So the next slide is something else that's actually also really predominant in people who have good mental fitness, and that's grit. So grit is that mental toughness and courage. So let's look at something like a rehab opportunity for someone who's slipped back into alcohol and other drug abuse. So with rehab comes that hope, but also it takes courage to go, all right, I'm going to do this again. And I worked in alcohol and other drugs as a counsellor and as a sessional lecturer at uni for quite some time. And it's something I love to talk about because that behaviour change that comes, we know that it's going to take several attempts at it. It's very rare for someone just to do it once and then they're right. They're straight back into, good mental health, good health and wellbeing and mental fitness. So you've got to have courage and you've got to be tough. It's also about having perseverance and passion for long-term goals. So what we talk about with grit is that it's a little bit like a marathon more than a sprint. So having good mental fitness means that it's doing things daily, routines every day that support and help. And Kate will talk about rhythm and things like that in sport, which is so important. And so having those goals is actually number one for promoting good mental fitness. So having hope, courage, and building up that resiliency to be gritty, to last the longer term through sport or through coaching or, through work, whatever it is that your goal is. So I might end it at that one. I think it might be time for Kate to jump in, if that's okay.
Thank you so much, Kel. Such amazing information to hear. And really kind of leads on, I guess, to talking a little bit about the power of sport. But I just wanted to touch on again, some statistics around mental health and acknowledge that usually mental health issues started around the age of 14. And, suicide is one of the biggest killers of Australian young people. And 75% of mental health problems, start before the age of 25. So, it's our young people, where this is actually starting. And I think sport is such a powerful way. It's not the only way, you know, it's not the answer to all the problems, because there needs to be, you know, this wraparound approach. But sport's such a powerful thing for young people to be involved with all the way through. And, you know, I reflect on my own experiences of how I got started. And it was after, you know, I had a separation in our family. So my mum moved to a single parent family. We just had a big move. We'd been over in Papua New Guinea for a couple of years, and we moved back to Australia. There was some bullying at school and so forth, and my mum got me involved in sport. And in reflection on that, I was terrible to start with. I was playing basketball. I couldn't catch a ball, but one thing that really stands out to me, and this goes back to connections and relationships, is that I had an amazing first coach. She was a woman. She was compassionate, empathetic. And, you know, even though I was terrible, she kind of guided me and kept me involved in the sport. And it was that relationship and the other relationships that were built through sport. So the positive, lasting relationships, it was the skill building. You know, I was finding some success eventually. It was the structure, having something to look forward to going to, and the physical activity that really kind of, you know, as a 10-year-old, got me through that. And if I reflect on my life, because I've played sport my whole life from that point onwards, those times where I have felt my own mental health slipping, it's always been sport for me that's pulled me back. And it's not actually the competition of, as I said, it's usually the relationships. It's where I go to find my relationships. And, you know, I have friendships that, you know, have stood the test of time because of it. So, I mean, I didn't even have that much adversity. There's people with a lot more adversity that, you know, could really benefit from, you know, programs and so forth that, you know, have kind, compassionate people like yourselves involved in them. And sport is just such a powerful way of helping, young people, and then leading into, you know, later on in life with mental health. It's something that they can continue to come back to. So obviously at the moment, like we said, sport's not happening because of this pandemic experience, but there are kind of other ways of being able to, you know, I guess, replicate what happens in that sporting environment. And one of the things is through pattern, repetitive and rhythmic activity. And as Kellie alluded to earlier, Bruce Perry talks about this a lot, who's a world famous child psychiatrist and expert around neuroscience and trauma. And regular dosing and spacing of pattern, repetitive, rhythmic activity throughout the day can really kind of help calm your central nervous system and calm your stress response down, so you don't end up, you know, kind of building throughout the day, both for workers and for people that, you know, may be involved in programs.
Can you say a little bit more about? Can you say a little bit more about what that is? It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, no worries. So, where do I start with this? So, if we think about the brain as a upside down triangle, and the bottom of the brain is where all of your sensory information comes in. So we're talking about the brain stem right at the bottom. It's where all of the sensory information comes in, and it's the part of the brain that's responsible for kind of all the primitive functions. And it's also, you know, the part of the brain that processes this information. And if this information coming in from the outside world is deemed to be safe or not something that you've had a bad experience with in the past, it'll be passed up to the top of your brain, which is your cortex, the thinking part of your brain. If the information is deemed unsafe, then what will happen is the brain stem will actually shut down the cortex, so the information won't go up. And that's what activates your stress response system. So you've all heard of fight or flight. That is what happens when that information doesn't get sent up to your cortex. And it is a little bit more complex than that, but I won't go into it without, you know, having a slide deck of showing you how it all works. What pattern, repetitive, rhythmic activity does is it actually helps calm down those lower regions of your brain. So it helps calm down the stress response.
So with something like, sorry to jump in, but something like knitting that I see more and more people doing, is that something that would fit into that?
Absolutely. Yeah, probably wouldn't have the same impact as getting up and actually physically moving your body. I see knitting as a really kind of mindfulness-based activity, but it is pattern repetitive and rhythmic. So absolutely. The good news is you don't have to do it for a long period of time. Getting up every hour and walking for 4 minutes is all you need to actually have this kind of cumulative effect of, you know, keeping your stress response in check throughout the day.
So,
and I think,
so if I get up every half hour and make myself an espresso on the dot, yeah, will that help my anxiety or lessen it?
I don't think so. Ron, I think you'll be increasing in anxiety just due to the effect of the coffee. Counterproductive. But yeah, I mean, this is, you know, it's quite powerful information to know. And I must admit, before I got on here today, I was feeling a little bit anxious and nervous. I jumped on my spin bike for 5 minutes just to, you know, calm things down a little bit. And so I use these strategies throughout my day as well. And I incorporate them in with my kids as well.
And so say more about the kid, like if we've got kids and, you know, we're cooped up, what's a good go-to for, say, you know, an 8-year-old child?
Yeah, I always turn on the music. We have a dance. Putting on, there's some great, you know, things on YouTube, some kids yoga. There's some great dancing stuff on YouTube. My kids know it better than I do because they do it at school. So shake breaks and stuff like that. Yeah, obstacle courses in the home, anything that's getting their bodies moving. Yeah, jumping up and down.
Trampoline's a good one.
Yeah, trampoline's amazing. Absolutely. Yeah, anything that kind of gets their bodies moving and has that pattern repetitive rhythmic flow can be really good. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I guess this is all, we're talking about neuroplasticity, aren't we?
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, the brain is the most plastic in you know, between the ages of 0 to 4. And then it becomes a little bit harder to change those neural pathways, but absolutely not impossible. And the brain develops from the bottom up. So, you know, in utero, your brain stem's developing, and that's where the pattern repetitive rhythmic activity actually comes in, because when you're in utero, when you're in your mum's womb, you're actually hearing the heartbeat, and you're sensing and feeling, you know, the rhythm, you know, of your mother really, and your own heart developing and so forth. So that's where it all starts. And because the brain stem is what's developing first, it's actually getting these pattern repetitive rhythmic, you know, heartbeat kind of going boom, boom, boom. And that's why it's actually so powerful to actually incorporate it in your everyday life, because it's what we're born with. When we're born, we're rocked and nurtured that way. You know, rhythm is all through our lives. And there's some cultures that just know this instinctively and have it, you know, embedded in their culture through music and drumming and and so forth.
So I can see a real link here, you know, when Kellie was talking about making a contribution. We've talked about it in some of our reflections, that it only has to be, you only have, well, I talk about it as observing our own competence. And the beautiful thing about sport is if it's done in the right way and it's inclusive and it's modifiable, then anyone can make a contribution, you know, regardless of their talent or experience. And so when you make that contribution, you get a little bit of a, you know, sort of a dopamine assistance, and then that puts you closer to a flow state. And in that flow state, then, you know, you're better placed, I think, to receive information that is processed less like a stress response and more like data that you can work on. So I don't know, is that a tenuous link there, or
No, absolutely. If we can stay regulated, then our cortex, which is, at the top of that triangle, is going to be open for business.
Yeah.
So it's exactly what you're saying. If we can stay regulated and calm through engaging in, whatever we need to, pattern repetitive rhythmic activity, making sure we're getting enough sleep, eating the right foods, having something where we're being of service and having a purpose, all of those things are going to move us more towards that resiliency scale and away from vulnerability. And our cortex is going to be open for business, and we're going to be able to think our way out of problems rather than act our way out of problems. When we talk about acting our way out of problems, it's what Kellie alluded to earlier, having a relapse and going back to those things that we've done over and over again. For some people, it might be overeating. For others, it might be alcohol and drugs. For other, young people, it might be self-harm that brings them back down again. The brain is an incredible thing to learn about, to kind of broaden your understanding around how to work with people and assist people, I guess, but also yourself. I always reflect it back to me as well. Yeah. And
so, Kellie, if we think about the ecosystem of a sports club, there's people, it's not just about the glory of the people on the field kicking goals, is it? It's about the people in the canteen, the people that do the laundry, that every person in that club is making a contribution and getting that reward, which enables them to go on and build resiliency. But what have you been doing, or what have we been doing during this time to replicate that or replace that? I know you guys are heavily involved in sport up there at grassroots level. What have you seen the response of the community been to sort of meet those needs that or those opportunities for service that sports presents?
Yeah, great question, Ron. And listen, there's been some absolutely ingenious ways that grassroots community have stayed connected. And then there have been other communities, I think, or other sports that have just,
dropped the ball.
Yeah, drop the ball and went, actually, this is all too hard. And, Zoom meetings, for example, so many of them during the day, I can't get on one again as a coach at night and then, authentically show up because I'm just tired and my eyes are sore. And, so there's so many real reasons as to why people can't. But some of the ingenuity that I've seen, and I'll certainly relate this back to my favourite sport of choice, which is rowing. And so I head the sports psychology and wellbeing for our school rowing at one of our schools at Loretto. And for those of you who don't know, Ballarat actually had the 1956 Olympics here. And so we have got a great Olympic rowing course that is at our fingertips every day, so which is great. Sometimes it's like ocean rowing because the weather in Ballarat isn't the best. But anyway, we do with what we can. And so what we find, so we've had different connection points for parents, had different connection points for rowers that are new, different connection points for rowers who've been part of the program before, and different connection points for the coaches. And so making sure that we have regular contact with each other, whether it be via messaging or whether it be via an organised Zoom thing. Even as coaches, we've worked out together. As coaches, we've watched YouTube clips together to look at finer points for technique and sharing of skills and resources. But the magic really happens when we get the girls together, because it's an all-girls school. So we have 75 rowers, and it's a highly contested. Every spot's really contested because about 100 girls from each year level try out for 25 spots. So it's the girls who want to be there just really want to be there. And so having things like regular wellbeing sessions with them, where we're talking about exactly what Kate's talking about. Are you getting out doing rhythm work? Are you, or going on organised walks together? What are you doing outside of the connections that we're organising for you? When restrictions lifted, and again, I'm really apologising for our sisters and brothers in Metro Melbourne, but in Country Vic, at least we've been able to walk the lake together and, do different things together and to connect. And now we can be out in boats together, which is fantastic. So it's about driving those activities home, but making sure no one's left behind. So with the parents, making sure that if they want to listen to the wellbeing session so that they themselves get a hit of that and also can support the languaging for that when they get home. For the coaches, it's about anything that they can do with the kids, because that's why they coach. A lot of our coaches are either ex-students or We have a guy called Barry who's been part of our rowing community for such a long time. Clearly never went to Loretto because he's a guy, but his daughter passed through Loretto many moons ago. But his passion is about showing up in whatever way he can for those girls so that they can be their very best when they get out in the boat. So Barry will often, be out in the rowing shed just fixing a boat, and someone will record him and he'll say, "Hey girls, I'm working on this for you for when you get back." Yeah. So connection, hope. That's how we have created some connections within our rowing community.
What I'd like to do, I'd just like to open up the floor if there was anything that we may have missed. I'm mindful of time, and I see at my notes, I've got about a dozen things I've written down that I'd like to explore. So what we might do, we might wrap this session up, but let's look at doing some shorter sessions that we can pinpoint some topics. Because for me, what this has done, it's really sort of formalized things that I've known, I guess, intuitively and through experience. And it's sort of set them out in a way that makes sense and given a language. So it's been absolutely brilliant. So before we do close off the session, I'll just open up the floor. Is there anything anyone would like to add?
I think it would be really helpful to our participants listening just to know how we can encourage them to seek help, whether it's through sport or through a service such as Lifeline. So I wonder, Kellie or Kate, if you have any recommendations of where people can seek help and how we can encourage them to do that.
Yeah, so Kate, I'll jump in first and then you add anything in. So certainly our helplines, like we have Lifeline, we have Men's Helpline, we have in Victoria, we have a Brother to Brother, which is an Indigenous men's chat line. So important. If you don't have people in your life you can trust, or maybe you're holding on to something that you feel so sacred that you don't want the judgment of others, because really it's the shame and vulnerability that stops us, the fear of people judging us, so that none of us like to feel shame or vulnerable at any given point in time. Sometimes having an external person to your life that you may never meet, that you may never talk to ever again, is great to just share some things with, and they'll have strategies. So Lifeline 13 11 14, a number that I put in everyone who comes into our house. I always put it in their phone, because you just never know when someone may need it from you or whether you may need it yourself. The other thing that I would recommend as well is anyone who you do feel like you have a good connection with, lean on them. Talk to them about where you're at. Create a cuppa opportunity, whether it's via online or whether you can physically go out and have a cuppa. But it's those connection points, and sometimes that's family, sometimes it's friends, and sometimes it's with a mentor like a coach. And making sure that you build that in as part of your mental fitness regime. So who am I connecting with this week? And for me, because I have the skill set of working in this sector for 25 years, I always nominate 2 or 3 people in my calendar every week that I'll reach out to. Who do I know? Someone who reached out to me about a month ago looking for some support. I'm just going to check in with them and see how they're doing. So that's that. It's a nice give and take philosophy, or the work of Stephen Covey many years ago, that emotional bank account. So putting deposits in people's emotional bank account. And if there's a time I need a withdrawal, I know that it's there, and I know we can do that. Yeah. Kate, from you?
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Kel. Fabulous points. I think there's the other side of it as well. If you're living with someone, or somebody that might be struggling as well, don't shy away. And you have a trusted relationship. Don't shy away from the conversation. Make sure you're asking them if they're okay, and as Kel said, checking in regularly, because even though we can't be physically close at the moment, we can still be emotionally close, and that can make all the difference. If you're feeling really down, even just receiving a text message from somebody can make all the difference in the moment. So I think that's really important as well, just making sure that you're checking in with those people around you that might be having a hard time, or you might sense they are, and just seeing if they're okay and asking the question.
Great, thank you so much. That's some fabulous points, and we'll make sure that we pop some of those numbers on our feed as well for people.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic chat. So let's convene after this and look at how we might present some smaller snippets, and we'll take that offline. So Certainly big thanks to Jack and Laura for setting this up. I know you guys were in the communication. I just sort of let it happen, so that was really nice. And Kellie and Kate for your time and your insight was brilliant, specifically with the sport background. So thanks again. Let's do this again soon. And yeah, RecLink out.
Thanks so much, Ron. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ron. We're always up for a chat.